Hi, this is John the Rosenhead, the Jerusalem psychotherapist. This week's Torah and Psychology post, Parshas Korach, is going to look at the rebellion of Korach and to see how we can understand this from a psychological perspective in terms of a child's development. We're going to look at the interplay between genetics, psychological makeup, personality, behavior, and the environment that a child grows up in and how this affects a person's development into adulthood. So we look at this week's Parsha. We focus on just one aspect of the Korach and his rebellion, and the fact that the Pasuk details that as well as Korach and all the people, the group that was involved in the rebellion, the children of these families were also punished. And Rav Chaim Shmulevitz queries and wonders why the children should also be punished. And he says, in the same way to Ben Sora and Myra, it's that we can look at these children and we can say that there's a certain trajectory. There's a projection here that they're going to become and grow up to be adults that are rebellious, an adult that is a bane on society, a person that is an adult that will end up committing sins. And the power of Machlekes is that these children who are growing up in an environment that they are being modeled rebellious behavior by their parents, by their father. They are exposed to violent or rebellious, aggressive behavior. In a sense, it's the personality and genetic makeup that they are receiving, and the environment that they are being brought up in is setting themselves up to develop into adulthood, which is also rebellious and will express itself in a sense as being a life of rebellion and machlokes. And the pasuk seems to be saying that it's better that these children, in the same way to Ben Sora and Myra, die at this point innocent in a way, we could say, as opposed to allowing the projection to play itself out, becoming rebellious adults. Now, from a psychological perspective, we can look at this in two ways. Number one is to understand that genetic makeup and an environment that a person is brought up in and the behavior that is modeled to a child they are significant aspects and affect how a child is brought up and certainly will influence the adult that they become. And this can be seen in the literature in terms of trauma, in terms of complex PTSD, in terms of being exposed to violence in childhood, an environment of aggression and of violence. It is likely, as the literature says, that the person will in their adulthood will have aggressive tendencies, abusive tendencies, but it's important to point out, and certainly it must be said, that this doesn't mean that it's inevitable. The Torah seems to be implying that this is likely, this is a projection, this is something which is it can't be denied. And from a psychological point of view, we know, based on genetics, behavior, environment, this is likely to happen. But we can understand, based on Bechira Chofshis, based on the idea of freedom and free will, and also on the literature and psychology does say that through the necessary psychological interventions, through getting the necessary support, a person does have the choice and could start to actually have an effect and influence that despite the environment that they were brought up in, despite their behavior and the behavioral modeling that was given and set for them as a child, they can still make different choices in adulthood. So this goes two ways, and certainly from a psychological perspective, we want to understand the different aspects that go into the development of a person's personality and childhood development into adulthood. But there's a message of hope that we can still change, that a person is able to gain insight into the childhood that they had and to be able to use this insight to positively affect their life and who they are and how they express themselves in their adult life. But what we see from this week's parasha, and we want to try to acknowledge and understand, is that there's a lot of responsibility on the adults, on parents, in terms of the environment that they set in the home, the behavior that they model for a child. And certainly if there's a home where there is aggression or there's an environment which is hostile and tense, this can have a detrimental effect on a child in their development. A parent wants to try to model effectively positive behavior. It's how to regulate their behavior and emotions in an effective way. that emotions can be expressed in a healthy way. And all this creates a healthy environment. And if we look at genetics, yes, a child will receive certain genetic makeup from their parents. But we know in the literature as well, there's an idea on a field of epigenetics. Epigenetics looks at the genetic makeup, but also how there's a flexibility to the expression of these genetics. That the genetic makeup might not change, but based on different aspects of environment and behavior, and also therapy, the expression of the genetic makeup can be diverse and can be flexible and change. So this also gives an idea that a child has the ability to influence, even if they have a genetic makeup, influence the expression of their genetic makeup, influence their behavior, the way that these genetics are expressed. So we have one aspect of this week's parasha that seems to say it's inevitable that if a child is brought up in a certain way, it will affect their adulthood. But there's also a message of hope that a person can always have the ability to change and influence this in their adulthood, based on the support that they receive and based on the choices that they make. Have a good Shabbos and keep well.